we go from brat summer to Hitler winter? Let's just say we've been through this exact same thing 100 years ago. Hello girlies, class has begun. My name is Nikita, aka nikitadumptruck, aka Hat Professorina at Bimbo University, and this is my first YouTube video. So many of you love the TikTok that I did on this very subject, so I decided to go even more in depth. There are so many parallels between this current time period and 100 years ago. You're gonna think your life was unique, but you're actually just living in an unoriginal sequel. Today we're gonna talk about some of the most fun times in history, the Roaring 20s, aka the brat summer of the 1920s, and what got us there. We're also going to talk about the Great Depression and World War II. Now, a couple things to remember. One, history does not repeat, it rhymes. And thank God that it doesn't repeat, because the 1920s were really terrible for a lot of people. We've made a lot of good progress since then, and we want to protect that. Two, while you and I live in a TikTok world where trends and mindsets shift fast, they didn't do that in the past. So while brat summer to Hitler winter for us happened in a couple of months, the time period that I'm going to be speaking about took place over the span of a decade plus. Now without further ado, class has begun! To begin, what was brat summer?
Brat summer is not caring about what anyone thinks.
In the summer of 2024, Charli XCX released Brat, a 15-song album about her experiences navigating the contradictions that come with being a 30-something woman. You can enjoy shaking ass at the club and debate being a mother. That friendship can be both empowering and a source of anxiety. You can be a lover girl while also realizing it's terrible for the brand. You can be a party girl and go to the farmer's market. The point is, brat is for everyone. Instead of trying to figure out life and try to fit into a certain aesthetic, we're gonna throw our hands up and let it happen to us.
I think it's a summer where you can chill, but you can also party.
It helped that the album cover was so simplistic. As long as there was neon green around, you were brat. The way 2023's summer aesthetic was Barbie pink, 2024's was neon green. But brat was different than Barbie. Barbie was an idealized image to aspire to, and brat was a rejection of micro trends. Barbie core, clean girl, mob wife, tomato girl, all of these trends rooted in consumerism and being a very specific type. Brat was kind of a build your own aesthetic, and that's why it had such mass appeal. Doesn't matter who you were, there was a rebellion in brat that appealed to everyone. Now, you can't talk about brat without mentioning the partying. Charli made numerous references to taking drugs and smoking, and the image of her drinking with the wine in the club has now become famous. Which leads me to the brat girlies from 100 years ago were the flappers. Give or take, like I said, history doesn't repeat, it rhymes. The flappers were a direct response to the Gibson girl of the 1890s. The Gibson girl, birthed from an illustration by artist Charles Gibson, was the idealized American woman. Small waist cinched by a corset, minimal makeup, hair in an updo. The Gibson girl's worth was in her marriageability. She was educated, but not too educated, because that would intimidate her man. The Gibson girl was the clean girl's great-grandmother. The Gibson girl mirrors the neutral beige old money aesthetic that today's brands strive for. And it got me thinking, what exactly was going on during the 1890s to have birthed such an aesthetic? But of course, the panic of 1893, a severe financial crisis marked by bank collapse, high unemployment, and the end of the prosperous Gilded Age. Interesting how that works. Now, like I said, there was no TikTok in the early 20th century, so trends were slow. The Gibson girl set the standard for womanhood from 1890s until the beginning of World War I in 1914. So then what happened? The girlies went to work, filling in the jobs left behind by the men who went to go fight the war. And by the time the men came back, it was too late. The girlies had figured out what it was like to have economic freedom. A few things had to fall into place for the party girl flappers to really take off. One, the end of a world war and a pandemic. The once priority of women to settle down and start a family took a backseat to the greater priority of, I'm alive, the world isn't over, let's party. The men felt this way too, so they weren't standing in women's way, handing out pamphlets of how women belong in the kitchen. I don't know what incels did back then. 2, the economy was that girl. Post-World War I, prosperity was really something to be desired. First of all, the assembly line was invented, speeding up production and also making cars accessible to the middle class. Then, electricity became common in everyone's homes, which led to a booming market for household appliances like washing machines, vacuums, toasters. So not only did this lead to a big consumer culture, but it cut women's domestic work in half, which means the girly pops had time to work and to go out. The flappers, like Brat, were rebellious, but they still existed within the realities of their time. Brat is about enjoying life, yet still knowing that you're in the midst of a cost of living crisis and you're living through the effects of man-made climate change. Similarly, the flappers sought independence but existed within a sexist society, still dealt with being paid less, and still dealt with far more rigid expectations of getting married. They had the Brat contradiction of confidence and vulnerability, wanting to seek and establish their own identity and place in the world, but also wanting love. Black flappers dealt with that and more. As Black people migrated from the South to the North and established their presence and culture in places like Harlem, New York, this really pissed off the KKK. The KKK rebranded themselves as Diet Police, promising to clean up their communities. So while underground parties and speakeasies were great for flapper culture, Black flappers had to be extra careful. They also did not get the voting rights that white women got in 1920. Not to be too I'm on field, but brat is a term within the kink community that refers to a person within a submissive role who breaks the rules within that role, making it a little harder for the people in charge, but still not being in charge. In that sense, flappers were very this. Flappers were fast-talking, loud women who rejected the Victorian expectations of womanhood that their mothers faced. They smoked cigarettes in public, they drank alcohol, they drove in fast cars, they made out with guys and then passed them around. Whereas the Gibson girl dressed in restrictive clothing, the flappers dressed in loose dresses. They wore heavy makeup and cut their hair short. If it looks like they're serving boy, it's because they probably are. Women so desperately sought the freedoms that men had. If the Gibson girl was a man's interpretation of a woman, then the flapper was a woman's interpretation of a man. I could write a thesis on how a good economy equals liberation for women. When we have jobs and money in the bank, we're able to take more risks with everything, from speaking out to exploring our careers to even experimenting with big, bold makeup. When we don't have money, life is uncertain, and you want to cling to certainty. And there is nothing more certain than tradition. Established gender roles, neutral outfits that pair with everything, staying in versus going out. Before I get to the economic crash and the Great Depression, I just want to talk about how inclusive 1920s culture was. Queer culture was pretty big because nothing forces you out of the closet than returning from the literal trenches and staring death in the face. Even if you're not gay, you're gonna be like, nothing matters, let's just kiss. Gays and lesbians had taken over neighborhoods in New York City like Harlem and the West Village. Queer nightlife was huge. The way Brat was dominated by queer people. Being gay was so cool that even straight people of the 1920s would flock to these clubs. Of course, being openly gay was criminalized, but the presence of straight people in the clubs acted as kind of a shield. The underground gay scene was called the pansy craze. The drag performers that came out of this era even gained visibility on Hollywood film. The pansy craze died down during the Great Depression when conservatism took over and there were calls to clean up nightlife. It would be decades before queer life would flourish this visibly again. And finally, to sum up this 1920s brat summer, you cannot have the roaring 20s without the jazz age, and you can't have the jazz age without the Harlem Renaissance. The Harlem Renaissance kick-started after Black people migrated to the North, fleeing the racism and the Jim Crow laws of the South. As Harlem's Black population grew, it became a hub for artists, intellectuals, and writers, all seeking a better life than the one they escaped. Being around similar people ignited a joy in this community. There was a desire for Black Americans to express themselves after being suppressed for so many centuries. Jazz defined this era. Many white people became obsessed with it, and for this reason, the 1920s is known as the Jazz Age. Jazz allowed Black performers to access the global stage and to have a platform that they otherwise may not have had. Prohibition was going on at this time, and for its many pitfalls, it did open up a culture of back alley bars and speakeasies. Unlike its once legal counterparts, speakeasies didn't have to abide by the rules of segregation, so everyone could mix and match and party here. Jazz dominated, the flapperinas were in attendance, dancing the Charleston. Coincidentally, the Charleston was a style of dance choreographed to a rhythm made by Black pianist James P. Johnson. So girlies, the lesson here is two things. 1, a good economy equals fun for everyone. And 2, without Black people's contributions, our lives would be capital B boring. Like, do you know just how many music genres evolved from jazz? A lot. Speaking of fun, I'm going to leave you with a fun fact that you can bust out at parties this weekend. Did you know the flapper and film actress Clara Bow was the original It Girl? That phrase became a thing because she starred in a 1927 movie called It that made her the talk of the town. Every cool girl is a descendant of a flapper. Now, bad news. The stock market crashed. Party's over, guys. We're approaching Hitler winter. Remember how I said that consumer culture popped off in the 90s? People were buying. The economy was doing really well. Well, there was a reason it was doing very well, and it's because credit had become widely available. So people were buying things that they couldn't afford with the assumption that things would always remain good. When we're in good times, we assume it's gonna last. Like last Friday in New York City, it was 78 degrees, and I was like, summer is here. Summer is here to stay. And to celebrate the occasion, I bought 2 skirts for myself, 2 mini small skirts, and joke's on me, because it's 30 degrees today, and it has been not above 50 for the past week. So people in the 1920s were buying stocks like I was buying summer clothes last week. The stock market was going up, and instead of buying stocks based off of a company's performance, people were buying stocks as bets. And these motherfuckers were so confident in a rising economy that they were borrowing money to then bet on stocks, knowing that they'd be able to pay it back. Like, I don't think I've ever felt that way in my life about the economy. Damn. Okay, so in the 1920s, investing was accessible to everyone. Everyone was doing it. Farmers, celebrities, billionaires, teachers, and investing was totally based off of hype. Y'all have those like Instagram viral restaurants where you live? We have a ton in New York City. So like, let's say that there is an Insta famous bakery, and I bet you $100 that this bakery is gonna be good. And I post about it online, and now suddenly everyone wants to bet $100 that this bakery is gonna be good. But here's the thing, I don't know anything about this bakery. I'm just going off of the hype. So now this bakery is overvalued, not based on how good it is, but just based off of hype. And eventually we learned the truth. Now look at how many people lost $100. That's what happened in 1929. Investors found out the truth and started panic selling their stock. So people hear that, hey, my coworker is selling his stock in company A, I gotta do it too, which snowballs and brings down the value of company A. Not only are people losing money, but they're also in debt. And this happens across the board. Stock market crashes, people lose money, people are in debt, people are unable to pay back banks. Banks who lent people the money to invest now have no money. Banks fail. Here's how we are luckier than the people of the 1920s. We have the FDIC. The FDIC is an independent government agency that ensures that if a bank fails, your money in the bank will not be gone forever. They didn't have that, and people lost their entire life savings. It was all a chain reaction. Banks fail, so businesses who need bank loans to operate fail, and then businesses cut costs by firing employees. Between 1929 and 1933, unemployment was at 25%. In today's population, that would be if 85 million people didn't have a job. The party of the Roaring 20s ended. Of course, people didn't have the money to go out, but it was seen as wildly out of touch if you did go out. And of course, in desperation, people turned to religion, which brought back a lot of traditional values. Women traded in their flapper lifestyle for marriage because financial stability was a little more accessible when you're in a family unit than if you're going at it alone. I mean, women are already getting paid less, already facing sexism in the workplace, way worse than we have it now, so might as well do it with the man, might as well pair up with someone who has all the rights. Here's another reason that people get more conservative in times of economic strife, is that when you're focused on survival and your family's survival, you're only looking after yourselves. You're not looking after others. And that made people more patriotic and America first. Herbert Hoover was the president at the time, and he decided to fix the economy in the way that he thought was best, which was rebuilding America's industries. America relies too much on foreign imports, so we're going to put major tariffs on foreign imports and build business locally so people buy locally and the economy gets better and everyone's happy. So the Smoot-Hawley tariff of 1930 was passed. How do you guys think that went? Let me give you a clue. A similar tariff passed 100 years before that, and it didn't work. The Smoot-Hawley tariff made the Depression so much worse. Other countries put a revenge tariff on American exports at a time where Americans had no money, so they weren't buying for American businesses. And so American businesses relied on people abroad to buy their product, and now they can't even sell their product because of the tariffs. Ha! Global trade goes in the toilet, the Depression worsens everywhere. So Herbert Hoover runs for re-election, and this is where male confidence is truly unmatched. Because, this man created a whole ass depression and still was like, I should be president again. So girlies, I never want to hear you say you have imposter syndrome ever again, unless you cause a Great Depression. Anyway, Hoover runs for re-election. America's like, nope. And FDR gets elected. Now, FDR is Cardi B's favorite president, and for good reason. FDR believed in government intervention. He essentially provided immediate relief for the suffering and fixed the system so it wouldn't break again. Now, FDR didn't cure the Depression entirely. I want to save FDR for another video just because it's way too much to dive into for this particular topic. But what he did provide was temporary relief. People were on the ground and he gave them a hand to get picked up. He didn't give them clothes and a house and a 5-star hotel, but he lifted them off the ground. Now, the Smoot-Hawley tariff caused havoc worldwide, but the country that was suffering the most was Germany. Germany had to pay reparations for World War I, which had ruined the economy. Germany not only had to get back on their feet after the war, but they had to pay debt. They were in so much debt. So the German government decides to print a ton of money, creating hyperinflation. Now, here's why we cannot print money, because then everyone has it, and then it loses its value. For example, if my lip gloss costs $50, but everyone has $50, then the lip gloss company is going to be like, okay, I'm going to charge $100. All you bitches can't afford this. My product means nothing. So German currency is absolutely worthless. There's a story about a German woman who one night put out a basket full of cash, and the next morning when she came to pick it up, the cash was still there, but the basket was gone because the basket was worth more. That should give you an idea of how royally effed Germany was. The people were suffering and they were desperate. And when you're desperate, you don't want the government that put you in that position. Screw those guys. You want someone new, someone who inspires you, someone who promises that you'll get rich. Someone who promises to make the country great again and says that it's not your fault you're in this position, it's someone else's, like immigrants. Enter Hitler. Oh, did you think I was going to say someone else? Hitler told everyone that democracy has failed and you need a strong presence in your life controlling everything. In other countries, a similar thing was happening where the trust in the government was fading and military leaders were beginning to take control, saying that expanding our territory is the only way that we will get out of this economic mess, because the more we expand, the more resources we can get from that land, whatever. So then begins the invasion of countries, primarily Hitler's invasion of Poland. And we all know what happened after that. World War II. To sum it up, the Great Depression eroded faith in democracy and allowed for strong central figures and for political extremism. Because when you're in extreme situations, you're going to go to extremism. And these fascists rose, and it led to World War II. Now, guys, politicians and presidents and rich people, they love war because to them, it's like a temporary boost to the economy. The government spends so much money on like weapons, and weapons companies make a lot of money, and therefore the politicians who hold stock in those companies are making a lot of money. So they love it. They love war, and it just doesn't boost weapons industries. It boosts like food, infrastructure, transport. So like war is great for the economy if you're a psychopath. Obviously, people literally die and it's literal war. Not to mention taxes go up for people like us because the government needs ways to fund the war. Cuts to public services happen to fund the war. Like, everyone's life gets worse except for rich people. But girlies, I'm not gonna end my first YouTube on a doom and gloom note, okay? So here's why I believe that we're not getting a World War III. 1, Hitler was actually beloved by a lot of people. Trump is not. 2, Germany had a propaganda minister that controlled what went on the radio, what went on TV, and in plays, and in the media. We have social media, so that literally cannot happen. We're too smart for that. We can, I mean, yes, we can all fall for propaganda, but we're not as centralized as Germany was. 3, and this is perhaps the most important thing, is that human beings don't want to die. Like, no matter how rich you are, you don't want to die, and World War III is guaranteed destruction because of nuclear weapons, okay? So like, you can be the richest person in the world and still realize that nuclear weapons will destroy everything you know and everyone you love. Believe it or not, even the executives at Lockheed Martin don't want to go there. Finally, and this is the most optimistic one in my opinion, Germany didn't have as much democracy when Hitler took over, whereas we have a 200-year history of democracy. Obviously not for everyone, but the principles are there. Also, state judges have a lot of power to block legislation. Like I said, we're not as centralized. Yes, what's happening is bad. Yes, it's bad that people are getting snatched off the streets for protesting, that immigrants are being detained without due process, innocent people are being detained, tech billionaires have way too much power, etc. You guys have eyes. Yes, we need to continue to be able to resist, but I personally think that being a doomer makes people lose hope, and then we stop fighting because we think that things are going to be bad anyway. So what I'm telling you right now is that yes, things are bad, but they're not as bad as they could be. And we have an open book test from 100 years ago. Looks like class is over, but not yet. I'm keeping you after the bell. Before I go, I wanted to answer y'all's burning question, which was, where was our roaring 20s? So here's why I think we didn't get one, but also why I think we will. Also, if you're hearing a car alarm, I swear I waited like 5 minutes for it to turn off and it's not turning off, so we're just dealing with it. So you gotta understand that in the 1920s, people wanted to be seen. Women were stuck at home craving self-discovery and independence. Men had just come back from being in an army unit and they also wanted independence. Black people wanted to be recognized for their artistic talents and their intelligence, which led to an explosion of style and experimental music and parties and wild times. Here in the 2020s, we're sick of being seen. We're constantly surveilled. You can't go to the club without not risking someone taking a video and going, look at this loser dancing, uploading it to the internet, and suddenly you're fodder for thousands of strangers online. We're living according to the trend of the time. We're too afraid to be cringe, and so we're not being individuals and we're not going out. And that's why we don't get the roaring 20s. But that doesn't mean that we're not rebelling. The 1920s rebellion was living fast. Our rebellion is living slow. When you're constantly surrounded by algorithms telling you what to buy and how to speak and how to dress, and next week it's something completely different, we're saying no to that. We're saying, I'm gonna be an outfit repeater. I'm gonna dance crazy at the club, and I'm gonna do some millennial shit. I'm gonna cook a dish that takes 8 hours to make. I'm gonna de-influence myself, and I'm gonna be, dare I say, brat? Well, thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned something out of this, and I genuinely hope that you walk away from this with a glimmer of hope. There is so much scary doomer news content out there, and I'm here to remind you that it's not the end of the world. Please like, comment, subscribe. I'm definitely going to be doing more of these, so you can go now. Bye!